For 2 days in a dark bathroom, I sat on the cold tile floor, listening to my child's laughter on the other side of the door. My son cruelly locked me in there just because I showered longer than 10 minutes. No food, no chair, no light. Just me and the trickle of the faucet, like the heartbeat of trust fading away. I once worked 3 jobs at the same time to raise him, walked through snow just to save a few dollars to buy him new shoes. Now he's teaching me the final lesson. Love can't be traded for respect. When the door opened, he said coldly, "Don't waste water." I answered only with a steady look. But in my head, another door was opening, the one that leads to freedom and the end of every tie. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts, and if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. My name is Walter Harris, 72 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. I've been a mechanic all my life, not rich, but proud that my hands can make real value. I'm the kind of man who believes that if you work hard enough and love enough, your children will grow into decent people. After my wife, Mary, died of cancer, I raised our son Derek alone from when he was 8. I never let him lack for anything, from his first pair of shoes to his college tuition, all paid with sweat and sleepless overtime nights. I used to believe that when he grew up, he'd put a hand on my shoulder and say, "Dad, rest. I've got it now." But life doesn't always repay kindness. Sometimes it only teaches you how to survive after being betrayed by the person you love most. I stepped out of the bathroom, my legs a little shaky after 2 days without sleep and food. The light from the hallway made me squint, not because it was bright, but because it stung. This house used to be my pride. I built each step, painted each wall, set each window frame with the hands of a mechanic. Now, every brick reminded me I no longer belonged here. I walked past the living room. Derek sat on the sofa, phone in hand, looking relaxed as if nothing had happened. Melinda, my daughter-in-law, glanced up for a second, then lowered her eyes to a magazine. No one said a word. No one asked if I was all right. All I heard was the TV turned low, playing a cooking show I used to like, a show about family dinners. How ironic. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I went straight to my room, the small one at the end of the hall, where I'd been turned into a tenant in the very house I paid for. When I closed the door, the room felt so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Slow, but heavy. On the old wooden table, Mary's photo still stood in its frame. 15 years have passed since she died, but her smile is as bright as ever. I remember that day clearly. I promised at her casket, "I'll take care of our son no matter what." I kept that promise, maybe for too long. After Mary died, I had to handle everything for Derek by myself. I worked days at a machine shop and drove deliveries for a courier company at night. On weekends, I fixed things for neighbors, from fans and gas stoves to lawn mowers, just to scrape together a few extra dollars for his school supplies. I never allowed myself to rest. Every time I got home, so tired I could barely lift my arms, I still stopped at his door, just to make sure his desk lamp was on. When Portland was covered in snow, I still walked to work, never filling the gas tank so I could save money for his meals. Once, when his shoes tore, I cut a piece of old leather from my coat to patch them. My son never knew. I didn't tell him because I thought that's what a father does. I believed that if I loved him enough, he'd appreciate it. But I forgot. Love can't teach gratitude if the person receiving it treats it like an obligation. When Derek graduated from college, I cried. I thought all the sacrifices had finally been worth it. I emptied my savings to buy this house so we could start again, a place for the two of us, and later, a daughter-in-law, grandchildren, warm family dinners. I pictured holding my first grandchild in this kitchen, where Mary once dreamed of baking for the family. But life rarely matches our dreams. After he married Melinda, Derek started to change. She was polished, but cold, every word wrapped in an irritating kind of politeness. I kept out of their way to keep the peace. I moved into the small room, cooked for myself, did my own laundry. I kept telling myself, my son's just under pressure at work, he'll come around. But day by day, the wall between us grew thicker. At first, it was small reminders. Dad, can you turn off the TV a little earlier? Don't leave the lights on at night. That wastes electricity. I always smiled and said, sure, son. But then his tone changed. From dad to old man, from reminders to orders. I heard him tell his wife, he lives like it's the old days. He won't learn how things are now. I heard it, and I stayed quiet. My silence, I thought, was a way to protect the peace. But it turns out silence can become complicity in your own humiliation. That night, before I was locked in the bathroom, I'd been fixing the backyard fence. The cold wind cut my skin, my knees ached, but I finished because I didn't want the neighbors to complain. When I was done, I just wanted a little hot water to ease the soreness. I didn't know that something so ordinary would be my last mistake in this house. When Derek knocked, his voice was already full of rage. You planning to soak in there for an hour? You think this house prints money? I answered softly. I'll be done in a minute, Derek. No need, he snapped. Don't you know what saving means? And then click. The lock sounded, dry and final. I thought he was bluffing. But after 10 minutes, then an hour, then 2, I realized he had really locked me in. I knocked and called his name. No answer. I heard the TV, laughter. They ate dinner. They went on, with their night as if I didn't exist. That night, I sipped tap water to get by. I thought of Mary, of the promise to never let our son feel alone. But maybe I was the one left most alone. In the morning, when the lock clicked and the door opened, I saw him standing there, eyes as indifferent as a stranger's. Don't waste water, he said, and walked away. I didn't answer. I just watched him, then went back to my room. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I heard one thing very clearly in my head. I'm not someone who needs permission to breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. Portland was bright and cold, mist on the rooftops. Birds called in the distance. For the first time in years, I saw something clearly. If I stayed, I would die slowly in silence. I smiled a little. Some rebellions don't need guns or shouting. They just need an old father with enough pain, enough memory, and a plan beginning to form in the dark. I didn't know exactly what I would do. But I knew one thing for sure. The door that locked yesterday was only the beginning of another door, a door to freedom. And this time, I'll be the one holding the key. I was born and raised in Northern Oregon, in a working-class family. My father died early, so I learned what it takes to work hard just to survive. After Mary passed, I had no time to grieve. I had to be a father, a mother, and the one who kept the fire burning in a house that had slowly grown empty. In the mornings, I worked at a machine shop on the outskirts of town, where the smell of oil and the pound of hammers were familiar sounds. Every day I started at 6 in the morning, my hands so calloused I barely felt them. When my shift ended in the afternoon, I didn't go home. I headed to a small delivery company on Elm Street and picked up a night shift. I delivered whatever people needed, from packages to paint cans, as long as it meant a few more dollars to bring home. Every night, I got back close to midnight. Derek was usually asleep, the light from his room spilling through the crack in the door. I stood there listening to his steady breathing, then sat at the kitchen table and opened the unpaid bills. I remember nights when I was so tired I couldn't eat, just drank a glass of water and fell asleep in the chair. But inside, I felt at peace because the next day I knew I was doing what a father should. Mary died of lung cancer when she was 48. I still remember that last afternoon at the hospital, her hand gripping mine, her voice hoarse from medication. "Walter, whatever happens, promise me you'll never let our child feel alone." I nodded. I couldn't say another word. After the funeral, I stood at her grave, cold wind through the pines, and I swore, "I'll keep that promise with everything I have left." People told me to remarry. A few women at the shop hinted at it. They said a good man shouldn't live alone forever, but I refused. Not because I was cold, but because I knew if anyone walked into our home, the first thing they'd see was Mary's photo still hanging in the living room. I couldn't let an 8-year-old boy think his father had forgotten his mother. I had no time for romantic dinners or trips away. My whole world was the kitchen, where I made him a warm bowl of soup every night, and the small desk where I sat beside him whenever he got stuck on math. On winter nights when the snow was thick and my car ran out of gas, I walked more than 3 miles home just to save on fuel. When I opened the door, Derek would run to hug me. My hands were ice cold, but my heart was warm. When he hit high school, I worked weekends too to save for his future. I didn't want my child to take out loans or worry about debt like so many other students. I'd seen too many people at the shop struggle their whole lives because of a rough start. I wanted my son to be different. Every time Derek's report card came, I felt proud. He was smart and diligent, and I believed Mary would be smiling if she were alive. I always told him, "As long as you study hard, I'll handle the rest." And I did, from the old laptop he used for homework to books and dorm fees. I didn't let him go without. When Derek went to college, I started taking extra hours at the shop. Some weeks I worked more than 70 hours, my hands bleeding from hitting the grinder. I hid every wound and just sent the tuition on time, with a small note, "Keep going, son, I believe in you." When I was too exhausted, I'd sit in the living room and look at his high school graduation photo on the wall and say to myself, "It's all worth it." On Derek's college graduation day, I took the bus to the ceremony. It was drizzling, but I didn't feel cold. When I saw him step up for his diploma, I burst into tears, not from exhaustion, but because for the first time in years I thought I'd done it. I'd gotten him through everything. I remember telling the person next to me, "That boy is my son. I raised him on my own." In that moment, I believed Mary, somewhere, was proud of us both. After the ceremony, Derek ran over in his cap and gown to hug me. I could smell the rain in his hair, and all the hardship seemed to dissolve. I handed him a small envelope, not much money, just a few $100s, but the last bit of savings left after all those years. "For you," I said, "to start a new life." He smiled, his eyes bright, and I felt lighter. I thought the hard days were over. I didn't know that moment was the start of another tragedy. When a father's love has no limits, a child may never learn where the limits are. I gave him the whole world, and years later, he used that world to lock me in a cold bathroom. After Derek graduated and landed a steady job in the city, I felt like I could finally breathe. The hard years seemed behind us, and I just wanted to see my son happy. When he introduced Melinda, a young, soft-spoken woman with considerate eyes, I truly felt glad for him. She was polite, called me Mr. Harris, and always smiled while helping clear the table. I thought, my son chose well. On the wedding day, the little church by the river glowed with lights. I wore my old suit and buttoned the clasp Mary once sewed back on. When the music started, Derek took his bride's hand and walked down the aisle, his face shining like the world was opening up. My eyes stung. Maybe this was what Mary wanted to see our son grown, with a home of his own and someone to lean on. After the ceremony, at a small reception, I raised a glass. I don't have anything except this house. I want to give it to you both to start your life. You won't have to worry about rent there, just live in harmony and love each other. That's enough. They were speechless. Melinda teared up. Derek hugged me tight. I promise I'll take care of you the way you took care of me, he said. I believed him with all my heart. A few weeks later they moved in with me. I stayed in the same house but moved to the small room at the end of the hall, giving the big bedroom to the couple. I cooked for myself, did my own laundry, even shut my door whenever they needed privacy. I wanted to be a thoughtful father, no meddling, no lectures, just there if they needed me. At our first dinner, Melinda said, "I'm grateful you're sharing this home." I smiled gently. "Treat it like your own." I didn't know that line would be the root of every disaster to come. The first months were fine. Melinda still smiled when she saw me, sometimes asking how to make Derek's favorite stew. But slowly, I saw her eyes change. The smile stayed, but it turned cold. She started rearranging things, redoing wallpaper, hanging their wedding photos all over the living room, then took down Mary's portrait that had been there for 15 years. One evening I asked softly, "Where's Mary's picture?" Melinda answered sweetly, "I thought it'd be safer in storage, sir. The walls here get damp." I nodded, but felt empty inside. I kept my patience, telling myself these small changes were just her trying to make a new space for their home. I didn't want to be the one who broke the peace. But soon, I heard other whispers, words that chilled me. Late one night, while getting water in the kitchen, I heard Melinda from the living room. "If we sell this house, we can buy a smaller, more modern place closer to downtown. I know an agent, we'd get a good price." Derek sounded hesitant. "But Dad still lives here. He'll understand," Melinda cut in. "He's old. Sooner or later he should live somewhere more suitable." I stood in the dark, the glass shaking in my hand, not out of anger but disappointment. I'd given them everything, this roof, this trust, and now they were planning to sell it as if I'd never existed. The next morning when I came downstairs, they were at the table chatting as if nothing had happened. I stayed quiet and didn't mention what I'd heard. Instead, I looked around the house I'd sweated to buy. The tiny cracks in the wall, the faint scorch on the stove, the balcony corner where Mary and I used to sit in the evenings, everything was the same, except the feeling in the house had changed. From that day, Derek acted like everything in the house was his. He changed the front door lock and hired a roofer without telling me. When I offered input, he just said, "Dad, take it easy. I'll handle this stuff. This house is ours now." The words hit like a hammer to the chest. I'd heard him clearly, and I knew in his eyes I was just a temporary occupant. One afternoon I saw a hand-drawn floor plan on the kitchen counter. Melinda was sketching a full flooring replacement and a bigger living room. I heard her tell him, excited, "As soon as we sell, we can redo it with a younger style. This place is so outdated." Derek nodded without a flicker of doubt. I kept quiet. I didn't object or argue. I walked back to my room and pulled out the deed. It still had my name, Walter Harris. I stared at that line for a long time. My hands trembled a little, not from fear of loss, but from realizing I'd walked myself into a trap called trust. I believed giving would bring love. I believed the son I raised would never forget his father's debt. But maybe I was wrong. I'd let my love go so far that it turned into blindness. And sometimes blind trust is a kind of sin. Since the day Derek and his wife moved in, the air in the house grew strange. At first, it was small remarks I thought were harmless. "Dad, please turn off the TV early. I've got work tomorrow." I nodded and clicked it off without a fuss. But those remarks multiplied and the tone changed, not a son talking to a father, but a homeowner reminding a tenant. One evening, while I was cooking my usual stew, Derek walked into the kitchen and frowned. "Dad, this smell is heavy. Don't cook greasy stuff like that. The house stays stuffy all day." I tried a small laugh, smoothing it over. "I'm used to it. At my age, simple food sits easier." From the living room, Melinda chimed in, voice edged and sweet. "In the old days you lived frugal. Maybe you didn't know people have range hoods now. Times are different." I stayed quiet, carried the pot to my small table, and ate alone in the back room. The stew, once a comfort through my loneliest years, now stuck in my throat. From then on, every habit of mine became a problem. If the TV was a bit loud, Derek knocked and said, "Turn it down. I'm on a call." If I forgot the hallway light, Melinda texted, "Sir, saving electricity is the civilized thing now." I smiled at the screen and typed back, "Thanks, good reminder." But inside, I felt squeezed in the very shelter that used to be my refuge. I started to move lightly, softly, like walking on thin ice. Mornings, I woke earlier than they did to brew coffee, ate a quick slice of bread, and headed to the yard. I kept my distance, thinking it would avoid friction. I weeded, watered, fixed the fence things I used to love. But whenever the hammer sounded, Derek stepped out with a grimace. "Dad, please don't hammer at noon. I'm trying to rest." I nodded, put the tools away, something heavy settling in my chest. Melinda was more delicate. She didn't yell, her voice was light as air and cold as a blade. "Don't do your own laundry. Let me handle it, in case you break the machine. What are you cooking that smells so strange? The neighbors might think there's a fire. Do you need money for anything? Letting it just sit there is wasteful." Nothing she said was overtly rude, yet it was enough to tell me I was being treated like a relic, a dated object in their modern home. I still tried to do things thoroughly. I mopped the floors, washed dishes before they got home, kept the house clean. I unjammed a window, changed the porch bulb. Not for praise, just to feel useful. When they returned, no one noticed. If they did, it was a hollow comment. "You're wasting effort. Just hire someone." Once, I got up early to mow the lawn. The sun wasn't up. Dew coated the walkway. I heard footsteps and expected a good morning. Derek only said, "You're too loud. People are still sleeping." I stood still for a few seconds, looked at the mower in my hands, and quietly shut it off. The noise stopped, but in my head something kept ringing. More and more, I felt like a guest. I wasn't invited to dinner anymore unless it was a special occasion. The living room had become their private space. Whenever I walked in, the conversation stopped. Melinda's glance slid over me like a knife. Derek forced a smile that sat stiff, like a courtesy he resented. One drizzly afternoon, I made tea in the kitchen. The door was ajar, and I heard them in the dining room. Melinda said softly but clearly, "I just want a place to ourselves." When he's gone, we can really live." Derek was quiet for a moment, then said, "Yeah, maybe it's time Dad lived somewhere else." I froze. The words weren't loud or harsh, but they cut deeper than any curse. I didn't cry or get angry. I set the cup down, walked back to my room, and stared out at the steady rain. I thought about my life, the cold nights, the exhausting shifts, the meager meals I saved for him. All of it, for the day I'd be treated as a burden in my own home. That night, I opened a drawer and took out an old photo. Me, Mary, and Derek, when he was 10. We were beaming in front of the freshly built house, my hands still stained with white paint. I gently brushed the boy's face in the picture and silently asked, "Where did that child go?" I didn't get angry. I just recorded every word, every look, every sigh at the dinner table. Some things don't need to be answered with a voice. Time will speak for us. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I sat in the dark, and for the first time in my life, one thought appeared, clear enough to be frightening. Maybe I should leave this place. Not because I lost, but because I no longer wanted to live like a pardoned stray in my own house. I exhaled softly, and inside me, something began to separate light as a thread but firm as steel. That night, Portland was colder than usual. Wind slipped through the door gaps, carrying winter's dampness. I had just fixed the backyard fence, the job Derek said didn't need doing, but I did anyway because I couldn't stand everything being crooked. My old back ached, my hands were numb, and I just wanted to stand under hot water for a few minutes to loosen my muscles. I hung up my coat and turned on the water. Warmth spread slowly, filling the small bathroom. The sound of the water blended with the wind whistling outside like a sad song. I didn't think much, just wanted to relax a little, as if washing away the fatigue of years of being treated like an extra in the house I had built. Not even 10 minutes had passed when pounding hit the door. Knock, knock, then harder. "Dad, how long has it been? You planning to use up all the hot water?" Derek's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. I answered, trying to keep calm. "I'm almost done. Just a few more minutes." But instead of quiet, his voice grated back. "Do you know the water bill doubled this month? You think I can just print money?" I stood still. His words seeped through the thin wooden door, mixing with the heavy steam. "I just want to warm up, Derek," I said softly. No reply, only a long sigh, and then, click, a small, dry sound ringing clear in the closed space. I knew right away it was the lock from the outside. At first I thought he was bluffing, like other times he got. Annoyed, I let out a small laugh, shook my head thinking he'd open the door in a few minutes. I knocked, called his name not loud, just enough to be heard. Nothing. I called again, still silence. Time dragged, as if every drop hitting the tile had a sound of its own. I shut off the faucet, wrapped a towel around myself, and stood listening. Outside came the TV, Melinda's laughter. Then the clatter of plates. They were having dinner. They were living, talking, laughing, while I, the one who had raised them, was locked in this damp bathroom. I knocked again, harder, but no one answered. I started to feel cold, not just because the water was drying on my skin, but because the loneliness cut deeper than any wind. I wrapped the towel and sat on the edge of the tub, convincing myself they were just sulking. Just an hour, I told myself. Then he'll open it. An hour, then 2 went by. Darkness slowly swallowed everything. Thirsty, I went to the sink, cupped water in, small sips. A metallic taste spread in my mouth, bland but stinging. I leaned back against the wall, listening to the clock inside my head count off time. I remembered cold nights long ago when I walked 3 miles home, just hoping to hear my son call, "Dad, you're home." Now there was only the drip of the faucet and fading laughter on the other side of the door. When night fell, I lay on the tile, my back throbbing, my head light from hunger. I don't know how long I dozed. I only remember waking with stiff limbs and a parched throat. A dim light slipped under the door, but not enough to tell if it was morning or night. I knocked again, this time just to be sure I still had strength. No one answered. On the second day, I was much weaker. Every time I tried to stand, my head spun and my vision darkened. I sipped tap water to get by and breathed deeply to keep from fainting. I was too familiar with the feeling of being forgotten, but I never imagined it would take such a flow. Concrete shape, moldy walls, a cold lock outside, and the stale smell of an old towel. I thought a lot not about anger, but about why. What had I done to end up like this? Where had I gone wrong that my only son could see me as a stranger? I remembered mornings on the job, late nights coming home, cracked hands, and his little boy smile. I asked myself, why do I have to ask permission to exist in my own house? That question echoed and repeated until my heart suddenly grew still. No more anger, no more hurt, only a cold awakening. I realized every sacrifice, if not valued, becomes a chain, and maybe tonight, the thing being locked wasn't a door, but my illusion about father and son. When the door finally opened, light flooded in and stung my eyes. Derek stood there, keys in hand, not an ounce of remorse on his face. "Don't waste water," he said, flat as if nothing had happened. That night, locked in a cold room, I understood. Not every child is grateful. Maybe only those who've been parents know how deep this pain goes. If you've seen a piece of your own story in mine, share it. I want to hear you. I looked straight into his eyes and said nothing. I just nodded, then stepped out. The tile was cold under my feet, the air in the house as heavy as ever. But something in me had changed, as if all the chill, the lock, the humiliation had only opened a faint smile. No one understood that smile, not even Derek. He thought I had given up, but I hadn't. I smiled because I knew, someday, another door would lock, only next time he wouldn't be the one holding the key. That night, I didn't sleep. Moonlight spilled in patches across the floor, lighting the tiny cracks I'd meant to fix for years but let go. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers laced tight. In my head, the images kept looping: the click of the lock outside, Derek and Melinda's laughter, and his blank eyes the next morning. I realized, if I stayed, sooner or later I'd be locked in again. Only next time, that door might never open. I stood, opened the old wardrobe, and pulled out an empty suitcase. Under neatly folded sweaters was a small steel safe, tarnished with age. I'd bought it when Mary was alive. For years I had nearly forgotten it existed. My fingers turned the dial, a dry clack sounded, and the door swung open. Inside were papers I once thought ordinary, but now they were the only tether keeping me upright. The house deed, insurance policies, savings books, everything intact, my name clearly printed on every line. Walter Harris, the sole owner of this house. No Derek, no Melinda. No one else had any right to touch it. I sat at the table and switched on the desk lamp. Warm light washed over my old face in the mirror. Carefully, I laid out each document, reading every line, every stamp, every number. Everything was legal. Everything was mine. This house, the one they treated as their property, had never belonged to them. For the first time in years, I felt my heart beating slow and steady, not from joy, but from clarity. I opened a drawer, took out a small notebook, and began to write. My hand trembled, but the strokes were firm. Step 1. Confirm ownership. Step 2. Contact my old lawyer, Mr. Peterson, the one who handled my purchase. Step 3. Find a quiet buyer, fast payment, no publicity. Step 4. Transfer all the money to a separate account at another bank. Step 5. Disappear. I wrote slowly, each word like carving into myself. This wasn't just a plan. It was a way out, a different door I would open myself. The next day, when Melinda greeted me with that fake sweetness, I smiled lightly as if nothing had happened. When Derek left for work, I wished him, "Have a good day, son," warm and calm. He didn't look at me, just grunted. I stayed composed. In his eyes, I was probably just the gentle, forgetful, harmless old man, and that very contempt would help me finish the plan. In the morning, I still made coffee, still tidied the yard, still turned lights off on schedule. Everything looked the same. But at night, once they slept, I turned on the small lamp and sat at the desk. Each night I prepared a little more, copies of the deed, bank accounts, a contact list. I made a few short, quiet calls. No one suspected a thing. Sometimes I wondered why I hadn't done this earlier. Maybe because a part of me still believed that one day Derek would come to his senses and remember who raised him. But that night in the bathroom taught me this. Love can't change a person who's lost his humanity. Every time I saw my son's shadow cross the wall, I remembered the cold tile and the dripping water. Every time I heard Melinda laugh, I remembered their laughter outside while I was locked in. Those memories, instead of hurting, sharpened me. They became fuel for my plan. One night, after they'd gone to bed, I took out a small map and marked a few cities I'd passed through back when I worked: San Diego, Santa Fe, and a little town on Florida's coast. I didn't know which I'd choose, only that I'd go somewhere no one remembered my name. Far enough that by the time they realized it, it would be too late. I locked the safe and slipped the key into my coat pocket. Everything was ready. Only time remained. In the mirror, my face appeared under the desk lamp, old, but not weak. The eyes looking back were calm, almost cold. I murmured, "Derek, you locked your father in the dark. Now your father will show you what real darkness is." I sat quietly for a long time, listening to the steady tick of the clock. The house slept. Only I was awake. In that stillness, something strange came over me, as if, for the first time in years, I was truly alive. No longer the compliant father, no longer the lodger in my own home. I was the one holding the key, and I swore, if I've been locked in once, then next time, I'll be the one to turn the final lock. 2 days later, I sat in a small office in downtown Portland. On the wooden plaque outside the door, the gold letters Campbell and Associates, Legal Services, caught the weak morning light. A man opened the door and stepped out, tall, almost 30 years younger than me, but something in his eyes looked familiar. When I greeted him, he paused, then smiled. "Good heavens, Mr. Harris. I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled, my hand slightly unsteady. "I heard you opened a law office a few years back. Good for you, Campbell. Now I need a little help." He ushered me in, made coffee, and asked about the old days. We recalled when he was a student in my shop class. So broke he worked part-time at a bookstore. Now he was an attorney with a clean office and a window facing the street. Life does know how to turn. After a few stories, I set the folder on his desk, the house papers, copies of the old purchase, bank accounts, and proof of ownership. Campbell studied them, brow furrowing, then looked up. "You want to sell this house?" "Yes, but I don't want anyone to know, especially my son," I said. He nodded, understanding at once. "A private deal. Quiet. No listing. No broker. I can handle it. But are you sure? Once it's sold, where will you go?" I looked out the window where light rain had started to fall on the street. "You know, Campbell, some houses stop being homes. They turn into walls that know how to jail you. We planned everything carefully." Campbell promised to find a trustworthy buyer, quick payment, nothing left on the open market. I signed a power of attorney giving him full authority to handle the sale. In under a week he called back. "Mr. Harris, I found a young couple. They need to move to Portland quickly and will pay cash. They accept your price, no haggling." I went quiet for a moment, then simply said, "Good. Do it." From that day, the game began. I still lived in that house, still shuffled down the hallway, still sat at the kitchen table brewing morning coffee. Derek had no idea that the bricks around him were already leaving his grasp. By day, I played the part of a tired, forgetful, harmless old man. When he talked, I pretended not to hear clearly so he'd have to repeat himself. I made sure he believed I was getting weaker, foggier. In truth, I remembered every detail, every word he said, every irritated sigh. One evening, he watched TV without looking up and said in a low voice, "You should move into a nursing home. They'll take care of you. I'm afraid you'll fall here and no one will know." Melinda sat beside him, smirking as she added, "He's right. They cook, they do laundry. Much more convenient." I just sipped my tea and answered evenly, "I'll go soon, don't worry." That simple line relaxed them both, because they thought I finally understood my place. At night, when they slept, I stepped onto the back porch and pulled out my old phone. Campbell had sent a short message. "All paperwork is complete. Closing on the 25th. Payment immediately after." I read it over and over, then deleted it. The night wind carried the smell of damp wood and decaying leaves, cold on my face, but inside I felt strangely warm. The next day, I went to the bank. A young teller greeted me brightly. I opened a new account in my name only. The sale proceeds would go straight there, and no one else would know. I also asked them to send all confirmations to a private mailbox Derek couldn't access. "Would you like to add a joint owner?" the teller asked. I smiled. "No, thank you. I've lived alone long enough." Quietly, I also moved my remaining savings, the fund Derek had once been able to draw from when needed, into this new account. When the system flashed "transaction successful," it felt like I had just slipped a noose off my neck. On the ride home, a light rain fell, breaking into beads on the Say's bus window. I looked at old streets, the cafes Mary and I once visited, the rows of trees Derek used to bike past, all familiar but distant, like memories with nowhere left to live. That evening, I sat at my small table and listened to the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Derek spoke to his wife, pride in his voice. "Don't worry, he won't last much longer. At his age, a few more months and that's it." I set my spoon down and smiled. Not angry, not bitter, just the quiet of someone who knows he's holding the final card. At bedtime, I opened my notebook and crossed off the first 2 lines. Step 1. Confirm ownership. Complete. Step 2. Contact lawyer. Complete. I paused at the 3rd line and added 2 words. In progress. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. The room went black, with only the street lamp outside spilling in. In that darkness, I heard the sound of a lock again, my own this time, and not to confine. This time, it would open the road to freedom and also close everything we once called family. 3 weeks later, the contract was signed. All procedures were complete, just waiting for the funds to hit the account. I reread Campbell's email one last time, short, clear, not a word wasted. Mr. Harris, the buyers have confirmed full payment. Title has legally transferred. Funds will be released next Monday morning. I sat still for a long while, watching those words glimmer on the screen of my old phone. Thin sunlight slipped through the curtains and lay across my hands, shaking, but steady. I drew a long breath. After years of being caged inside the darkness of my own roof, freedom was finally only a few days away. In the afternoon, I stopped by the bank. I didn't withdraw much, just a few hundred each day, enough not to draw attention. I put the cash into envelopes and hid them in a small suitcase. Every time I folded one shut, it felt like I was wrapping up part of a memory, the years of hard work, the lonely nights, and the pain I once thought would follow me forever. That evening, I sat in my room and listened to Derek and Melinda talk about remodeling the kitchen. "I think we should take down this wall and open up the space," she said, excited. "Yeah, we'll start construction at the beginning of next month." I smiled. They had no idea that at the beginning of next month those walls wouldn't belong to them anymore. I wasn't angry, and I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt light, like someone leaving a place they once loved that had turned to cold smoke. After they went upstairs, I spread a map of Europe on the table. My finger paused on the name Lisbon, Portugal. A city on the Atlantic, mild weather, people who speak and smile gently, a sea as blue as the youth I once had. I'd read somewhere that people in Lisbon live slowly, like to drink coffee in the morning and listen to sad fado at night. I thought maybe that was where I could start, over where no one knew who I was, and no one called me the unnecessary old man. I contacted a small travel agency. The young woman on the phone sounded warm and bright. "What day would you like to fly, sir?" "I need a one-way ticket," I said. "To Lisbon." She was silent for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "I understand, sir." That sentence echoed in my head all night. One way. It wasn't just a trip. It was a final period at the end of an old life. A week before the official closing, I wrote a handwritten letter to Campbell. My pen shook, but my heart was quiet. "Campbell, you've done more than a lawyer. You helped me find faith in people again. I know you'll keep this secret from me, and I know you understand why. When the deal is done, don't look for me. Just know I'm at peace. Thank you, student, for helping your teacher leave a house that had become a prison." I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and mailed it the next morning. No return address. From that day, I started packing. Not much. I had no intention of taking the past with me. I opened the closet and took out a few newer clothes, the necessary papers, and the watch my wife gave me on my 40th birthday. The face was scratched, the leather strap worn, but the hand still ran steady, as if Mary were somewhere still watching my steps. I put everything into the small suitcase. As I pulled the zipper, I paused and looked around the room whose boards and window frames I'd set with my own hands. Everything was the same. The old armchair, the desk, the family photos I no longer wished to see. I touched the tabletop. The wood's cool smoothness cleared my head in a strange way. "I'm not taking the past," I whispered. only the rest of my life. On the last night, I sat by the window and watched the full moon hang over Oregon's sky. Silver light fell across the backyard where the fence I'd just fixed still stood straight. The wind through the trees sounded like Mary's whisper, "Go, Walter, you've done enough." The next morning, I woke early. Coffee in hand, the familiar smell tasted different. Not bitter, just a hint of calm. Derek walked by, caught sight of the small suitcase by the door, and raised an eyebrow. "You going somewhere?" I smiled lightly. "I told you I'd be leaving soon," he snorted, assuming I was joking, and walked away. When the door closed behind him, I looked around the house one last time. No anger, no regret, only the peace of someone who's lived long enough to know. Not everyone is blessed to be loved the right way, but everyone has the right to leave when love turns into chains. Everything I needed was in that small suitcase: a few clothes, papers, Mary's watch, and a man who had stopped being afraid. The rest I left to them: the house, the walls, and the darkness they built themselves. That morning, Portland was unusually quiet. No wind, no birds, just the thick silence of a day about to change something. I got up at dawn, with pale light slipping through the curtains onto the old blanket. Today was my last day here. I brewed myself a cup of coffee. The gentle bitterness filled the kitchen. Everything felt so familiar it seemed like I was only heading out for a few hours and would return. But I knew once the door closed, there would be no coming back. I walked slowly through each room, letting my eyes rest on everything I'd once touched and cared for. The window where Mary and I had hung the green curtains. The dining table where Derek sat doing multiplication at 10, mumbling under his breath. The corner crack in the wall I'd promised to patch and never did. With each step, I seemed to hear the laughter, the talk, the clink of spoons against plates, all sounds long gone, now only echoing in memory. I placed my hand on the kitchen counter. The wood was cool and smooth, but beneath the finish were the years, the tiny scuffs only the person who cooked there would recognize. I brushed it, like saying goodbye to an old friend. Down the hall, light slanted across a crooked frame on the wall. It was the photo of Mary and me in front of the house the day it was finished, both of us young, eyes full of hope. I took it down, looked for a long time, then placed it in the suitcase. Everything else I left where it was. What belonged to the past I didn't want to carry. On the desk, I set a small envelope. Inside were the house keys and a short note to Campbell. "The keys are here. Thank you for keeping the secret and doing the right thing. When the buyers arrive to take possession, hand over as agreed. I've already left. Be well, Campbell. W.H." I sealed the envelope and wrote his name in a shaky but straight hand. The letter didn't need to be long. The action said what mattered. Outside, a taxi had pulled up early. The driver, a kindly middle-aged man, greeted me in a warm voice. "Mr. Harris, I'm a bit ahead of schedule. Hope that's all right." I smiled. "It's fine. You're right on time." I lifted the suitcase to the door. Each step felt like stepping on a memory, heavy but decisive. At the last threshold, I turned for a final look. Light streamed through the window, catching the dust motes in the air. The house was silent, as if holding its breath. I pulled the door closed gently, so softly there was barely a sound. The faint click was ordinary, but to me, it was a farewell. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I wouldn't be able to go. The sky was pale gray. The air smelled of rain. I got into the car with the suitcase by my side. As the taxi pulled away, the house receded, then vanished behind the bare trees. In the rearview mirror there was only a winding road and a thin ribbon of mist. I felt no regret, only a lightness, as if I'd set down something that had weighed on me for half a life. On the way to the airport, my phone buzzed. Derek's name lit up the screen. I looked at it for a moment and turned it off. I left no message, no explanation. Partly because I didn't need to, partly because there was nothing left to say. Words arrive too late once a heart has locked itself. When the plane lifted off, I looked out the window. Portland shrank, rooftops turning into specks beneath gray clouds. I knew Derek was likely still asleep. When he woke, he might make coffee, still believing everything was his until the new owners walked through the door. And then he would understand. Not everything you're given is forever. I didn't hope he'd feel remorse. I only hoped he'd remember there are mistakes that apologies can't fix. Light spread across the clouds. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I could still hear the wind, but it wasn't cold anymore. I thought about Lisbon, bright stone streets, Fado drifting through the evening, the smell of coffee in the morning sun. I thought about the sea, the waves, and freedom. For the first time in years, I carried no fear, no children, no binding memories, no darkness. Only me, Walter Harris, and an open sky. As the plane broke through the cloud layer, white light flooded in. I looked out at the wide, endless sky and smiled. Freedom, it turns out, isn't having everything. It's knowing when to let go and having the courage to walk away. That morning, Portland still wore a thin veil of fog. Pale light fell across the leather chair in the living room where Derek always sat with his morning coffee, playing the busy homeowner. But today, when he woke, something in the air had changed. Lively voices drifted up from downstairs. Footsteps, chairs scraping, and someone calling cheerfully, "Hey, put those boxes near the fireplace. It's brighter over here." Derek shot upright. His brow furrowed as he listened. The voices were clear, not the neighbors. He opened the door and hurried down the stairs, heart pounding. The scene froze him. In the living room, a young couple stood amid a stack of boxes, with two movers carrying items inside. "Excuse me," Derek stammered. "Who are you? Who gave you permission to come into my house?" The young man turned, surprised but courteous. "And you are?" "I'm the owner of this house. This is my home," Derek barked, face flushed. The young woman pulled a document from her bag and held it out. Her voice was calm, almost chilly. "We bought this house last week through Attorney Campbell. The closing is complete. Today, per the paperwork, we officially take possession." Derek stood stone still. A low hum filled his ears. "No way," he muttered, snatching the paper and scanning the bold lines. "Seller, Walter Harris. Buyers, Joshua and Emily Cole. Closing date, the 25th. The bright red seal burned like a slap. Melinda hurried down, hair messy, face bare. "What's happening?" Derek pointed at the document, his voice catching. Dad sold the house." "What?" she screamed. "Impossible! This house is ours." The young buyers looked at them with a mix of awkwardness and sympathy. "We're truly sorry, but the transaction is fully legal. We just followed procedure." "Mr. Harris's attorney can confirm." Melinda grabbed Derek's phone and dialed frantically. But my number was disconnected. She called the law office, her voice shaking. "I'm Mr. Harris's daughter-in-law. There must be some mistake. He can't sell without telling us." On the other end, Campbell's voice came light but firm. "Ma'am, Mr. Harris is the legal owner. All documents, signatures, and procedures are lawful. The proceeds have already been transferred to his personal account. I'm afraid there is no mistake." Melinda dropped the phone onto the couch, her face drained. Derek sank onto the stairs, head in his hands. Everything seemed to collapse around him. The thud of boxes, the squeak of dolly wheels on the floor, all of it sounded dry and final. His house, the place he thought was permanent, the place he'd arrogantly called mine, was now full of strangers' voices. He really left," Melinda whispered. Derek didn't answer. In his mind, he saw his father sitting at the small table, quiet, no arguments, no complaints. He remembered that faint smile when I said, "I'll be leaving soon, don't worry." Now he understood what that sentence really meant. Melinda began to cry, angry and afraid. "All our money was tied up in this house. Now what? He took everything." Derek looked around, the room emptying as their things were pushed onto the porch. He couldn't speak. What he felt wasn't just the loss of money, it was a blow straight through his pride, through the illusion that he controlled someone else's life. That afternoon, Melinda packed and called a taxi to stay with her mother. She didn't come back. Derek stayed alone in a house being cleared out. When the movers closed the last door, the echo rang cold enough to bite. He sat on the floor, staring at the blank space where the dining table used to be. The afternoon light tilted across the bare wall. Everything, stove, cabinets, table, chairs, was gone in a single day. So too were his arrogance and greed, dissolving without a trace. He tried calling again. The number was still out of service. After a few seconds, Derek hurled his phone to the floor. The crack echoed through the house, bouncing back as emptiness. Somewhere far away, maybe across the Atlantic, under Lisbon's gentle sun, I was sitting with a hot coffee, listening to the surf. I didn't need to witness any of it, didn't need to see him suffer or repent. I only needed to know that, at last, my silence had done what scolding never could. Because some verdicts don't need a court. They only need one person to leave in silence, and leave the one who stays with a hollowness no words can erase. Lisbon greeted me with the smell of sea salt and steep streets paved in bright white stone under the morning sun. The little house I rented sits on a quiet street in Alfama, just a few minutes' walk from the water. Every morning, as sunlight pours through the window, I hear gulls circling and church bells drifting over the red-tiled roofs. No one knows who I am, and I don't feel the need to explain. I started over with the smallest things. In the morning I brew coffee, learning to grind just enough for one person, not too strong, not too weak. I buy fresh fish at the market near Santa Lucia Square, where the vendors call me by a friendly nickname, Sir Walt, the kind man from America. They don't know who I used to be across the ocean, and they don't need to. Here, a greeting, a smile, and a few coins are enough for people to treat each other like friends. I speak simple English mixed with a few Portuguese phrases I learned from the vendors. Bom dia, good morning. Obrigado, thank you. Everyone smiles back, and that's enough for me to feel I belong here. No one asks my age. No one demands an explanation of the past. In Lisbon, the past dissolves into the sea breeze, leaving only a present as gentle as sunlight on the water. In the afternoon, I often go to the water by Cais das Colunas, where waves slap the stone steps and locals sit quietly fishing. I bring a small notebook and sketch whatever I see: boats, a child chasing a kite, or simply a coffee cup on an old wooden table. My hands shake with age, but each stroke still keeps the rhythm of memory. At first, a few passers-by stopped to watch me draw. Then they got used to me, sometimes leaving a compliment. "Beautiful, Sir Walt." I just smile and nod. I don't draw to sell or to show off. I just want to see the colors of a life I had forgotten for too long, the colors I lost between four cold walls in Portland. I save evenings for slow things. Sometimes it's a simple dinner of grilled fish and white wine. Sometimes just sitting by the window listening to the wind move over old rooftops. Some nights, my neighbor, an old man named Fernando, brings over pastries and says in a gravelly voice, "Eat, my friend. Here, the lonely are cared for with food." I laughed. At this age, friendship that simple is enough. The days pass gently. Each morning I walk along the water while the city is still sleepy. Early light skims the surface, spreading a warmth that reaches the heart. I don't count time anymore. I don't think about tomorrow. Today, this morning, is enough to live. Sometimes, in a quiet moment, I remember the old house, the son who once locked his father behind a door. But that memory now is only a small wave that rises and fades. I don't resent it, and I don't wait for an apology. I understand that some people need a lifetime to realize what they've lost. One morning, as the sun lifted off the sea, I sat at the railing with a hot cup of coffee, watching small boats slip by. For the first time, I felt my heart truly calm. No heaviness, no fear. "I'm not running away," I told myself, watching the light spread across the water. "I'm going to a place where a person doesn't have to ask permission to live." Lisbon, the city of sunlight and music spilling from open windows, has become my home. And in the steady sound of waves, I knew the rest of my life would pass like this morning, light, bright, and free. Summer in Lisbon drifted by like a low, steady melody. The sea stayed blue, the wind carried a clean, salt coolness. One morning, while making coffee, I received an envelope from the bank. Inside was a statement confirming my account had been fully transferred, stable and secure. The number didn't make me feel triumphant, it simply made me smile. Because what I truly gained, after everything, wasn't money, it was the freedom to own my life. I sat at the small wooden table by the window and opened the old notebook I write in every night. On a fresh page I wrote, "I was once locked in a cold bathroom with only the drip of water and laughter outside the door. Now I open my own life's door, step into the light, needing no one's permission." I read that line again, then set down the pen and let the morning sun flood the page. I no longer feel angry at Derek, and I don't want to know how he is now. Some punishments don't require human hands, time will do the rest. I used part of the money to set up a small fund called the Harris Fund for Dignity. It helps older people abused by their children find shelter and legal support. Campbell, the student from years ago, helped me finish the paperwork. When I signed the formation documents, something lifted inside me. I knew this was the only way to turn old pain into something useful for others. Every morning, I keep the same habit. Step onto the porch, brew coffee, watch the sun rise over the Tagus. Light spreads over the tag, small boats, and reflects on my face lined with age, but no longer burdened. Once, Fernando asked, "Walt, don't you think about going back to America?" I laughed. "No, I'm home already. My home just happens to be across the ocean." That afternoon I added a line to my journal. Justice doesn't always arrive as a sentence. Sometimes it arrives as the peace of the person who was hurt. When you no longer want revenge, it means you've already won. I closed the notebook and listened to the surf. The past hasn't disappeared, but it no longer holds the reins. I learned something simple that took a lifetime to understand. To love without setting limits is to erase yourself. At dusk, the sea wind moved through my gray hair. I stood on the porch watching the sun sink where sea and sky meet in a soft band of red and orange. A neighbor boy ran by and called out with a grin, "Good evening, Sir Walt." I waved back, feeling an unfamiliar quiet bloom in my chest. This life doesn't need a happy ending, only a peaceful one. I forgave, not because they deserved it, but because I needed freedom from my own anger. I sat in the old wicker chair, closed my eyes, let the salty wind thread through my hair, and listened to the waves beating like a steady heart. No more dark bathroom, no more lock on the outside. Only the sky, the sea, and a man who unlocked his own life. If you're still here with me, thank you truly for spending time with an old man's story. If you've been betrayed or hurt by your own family, remember, silence isn't weakness, it's the strongest way to leave in peace. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't for them, it's for yourself. And if you can, tell me where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story has traveled and which hearts it has touched. Hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe, not for the numbers, but so I'll know that on the other side of the screen, someone is still listening.